Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me. Very powerful talks all around. Thank you, Mary. What's good at gatherings like this is when you hear repetition and when you hear people talking about the same thing. And I'm going to talk about the same thing as well, which is collaboration. And like the sun, we've got lots of room for hope today. So it's a good day. And what's really nice to hear as well is how Ireland is punching above its weight. We heard from Mary earlier in terms of participation, and how rare diseases are punching above their weight too. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So I work for a company called Gilead, but I'm here today to represent the Irish Pharmaceutical Healthcare Association. We are the representative group of the pharmaceutical industry in Ireland, with about 40 different members, companies including our own. And we're working on the inventors of medicines, vaccines, and self-care medication. And so we work together, and the four key areas that we work on are access. And access is important. That's ultimately what we're trying to do, is get access to medications for patients. And I work here in Ireland, so it's to access here in Ireland. There are challenges when it comes to rare diseases, because the systems that we've set up to try and assess whether a medicine is cost effective or not are based on good quality data and gathering that. That's what we're talking about doing today. That's what we're trying to do, and that can be difficult in rare diseases. And also it's a chicken and an egg situation, because for companies to place trials here, they want to have a line of sight that patients will get access to those medicines in Ireland. We work on our code, which is the what governs the way we conduct our business in Ireland. Innovation, which I'll talk to you about today, and investment, which is something that's in the news a lot at the moment, when we should be talking about trials and research and access and outcomes for patients. So one of the key groups within the IPHA, I'll call it, the Irish Pharmaceutical Healthcare Association, is the Clinical Research Exchange Group, and I'm co-chair of that group. And this is a gathering of individuals that work within our member companies who initially got together, it was an exchange forum, so sharing experiences of running trials in Ireland, focusing on the process, and what were the challenges people were having. Again, trying to speed up and make the environment better for placing clinical trials here and for running them here. It's grown from that, though, and this is when collaboration will come into it, where we're working. IPHA will have an idea. We will be trying, individuals will be trying to get their companies to place clinical trials here in Ireland. But in order to do that, you're based on how successful you were with your last clinical trial, how well you recruited, how quickly it took place, what were the costs, certainty. So Ireland can be a great place to run clinical trials. We all know that. We've got a strong biopharmaceutical manufacturing company presence here in Ireland. As we've heard this morning, we've got a lot of global key opinion leaders who work here, treating and performing research here in Ireland. And we've got a very willing and adaptive policymaker community that includes politicians, aspects of the media, and of course, as we've heard today, from patients, patient associations, and patient voices. But currently, what we have been experiencing are, and not all the time, but delays in starting up trials, and we don't always meet our recruitment commitments. And when we don't do that, it's more and more difficult to continue to place trials here in Ireland. One of the pieces of work that IPHA does is to produce a clinical trials comparison report. So what we're doing is we're looking at countries that are similar size to Ireland, which is Denmark and Finland, similar sized populations, similar gross national income. And when you compare us against those countries, what we can see is in different phases of trials, so from the earliest phase 1 to phase 4, companies and trials are more likely to be placed in countries like Finland. You're least likely to be placed in Ireland. So why is that? And that's something that IPHA has looked at. And we've gone out then and we produce this report so that we can talk to people who are interested in this area, and we can motivate change and get them interested. And that's happening. So we can see and this is important in the government, in the program for government, particularly, we can see that there's a commitment to improve access to these medicines for people living with rare diseases in Ireland. There's a commitment to rare disease research in Ireland, and there's a commitment to clinical trials in Ireland. And what we've seen is the setup of the National Clinical Trials Oversight Group, and that's coming from the Minister, who's at the highest level, saying we need this because we want to attract more clinical trials here in Ireland. That includes for rare diseases, and that's important. So what IPHA had been asking for over a number of years is, that we have standardised clinical startup trial requirements, and we talked about it, we've heard this again earlier. It can be things like a standardised agreement, because if you have varying agreements for different trials, different sites, different companies, that causes delays. Why not have one template? There's big issues around data protection, which we heard earlier. We're dealing with responsible people within sites who don't have the comfort, because they see the risk associated with having to protect the data that they're responsible for. But they can take a belt and braces approach, and that can cause delays as well. So how do we get around that? How do we support those individuals? How do we standardise that? To have permanent clinical research people, to have protected clinical research time. We talked about resourcing. It's a chicken and egg situation again, where what is happening is you will wait to have the clinical trials before you will hire and appoint the people, but if the people aren't there in place, then you can't conduct the trial. So what we want to see is a sustainable environment, and what I'm talking about here are things that are happening in those other countries and can happen here. So collaboration is key. So that, again, I'm glad to know that I'm repeating that. I mentioned some of the stakeholders that IPHA has been working with over the last few years, in particular the National Clinical Trials Office, which has recently been closed down too. This, again, when we talk about sustainable funding and certainty, the National Office for Research Ethics Committee, the HSE, Data Protection Commission, State Claims Agency, and the Department of Health's National Clinical Trials Oversight Group that I spoke to. It's really important that all these stakeholders and those of us in the room are collaborating. That's how change happens. A company can come and say, we're willing to place a trial, we're willing to fund a trial, but that doesn't solve the problem. They can't do that if the infrastructure isn't there. So IPHA has, in the last couple of years, produced a standard template with the HSE. It's like a CRO model clinical trial agreement. That makes a difference. It doesn't solve for everything, but it improves things. It can speed up clinical trials being put in place. We've clinical trial indemnity, clinical trials activity comparison reports that I've talked to you about, and then we've also are beginning to look at cost and cost guidelines around running clinical trials and sites. There's standardisation there, and then standardisation around the management of data. And they're going well, but there's more that we can do. So it's about thinking bigger. And we've licensed to think bigger when the government, and call me optimistic, but when they are putting a body like the National Clinical Oversight Committee together, the people who can make a difference are now taking this very seriously, and that's good. So the kind of things that are being discussed, and this is very relevant to rare diseases as well, is that how do we address those startup delays that we've discussed? Can we advocate for incentives? So can we have Deloitte, a consulting company, presented to IPHA recently, and they're talking about countries like Spain, where there are tax incentives for placing trials in Ireland. Can we look at doing that? Can we guarantee resource and funding certainty? Can we have transparency around costs in terms of running a trials to make it easier to put a place in a trial? Data infrastructure that we've discussed today. Engaging stakeholders, and this organisation does a great job, and we've heard about that today, about PPI and engaging patients. That's not standard across all organisations. What can we do more in that area? How can we learn from other countries and others? So the UK is looking at this very seriously since Brexit. How can they increase their attractiveness for placing clinical trials? And we had Lord O'Shaughnessy, who's the Undersecretary of Health and is leading this in the UK, came over and presented at the National Clinical Trials Office conference last year. And he mentioned a number of areas, and he talked about rare diseases as well. And Emer spoke about this too, but things like decentralised trial models, they're important. They can make a difference. Clinical trial accelerated networks, where you might be looking specifically at rare diseases, and ultimately in developing niches. So Ireland can be excellent at this. Ireland could be excellent in rare diseases. Maybe we focus on rare disease, and that is our niche. there's an opportunity to shout and ask for that at the minute, and I'd encourage everybody to do that. And then lastly, access. As I said, there needs to be line of sight. There needs to, and this is something that Eva's working on too. Companies need to know that patients can get access to these medicines ultimately. So that's it. That's it for me. And I want to thank you for having me here today. And it's been a great day, very collaborative, and let's continue to do that. So thank you very much.